Hello. Hello, welcome to Think and Grow Rich Daily Hangout. I'm hoping that today's Hangouts are actually going to work. We've had a lot of technical issues recently, so thanks for bearing with us if you're catching the replay or here live. So we're actually reading from the lecture notes that Napoleon Hill did some years after publishing his book, and his lectures are called Your Right to Riches, and so we're about halfway through them. So don't worry if you haven't watched. We're a bit off the track now because I think this is the first Hangout in about a week or something. So what we were reading about before is basically like a mixture of the philosophy which you have in the book and then extra information, awarenesses, anecdotes that Napoleon was basically speaking to in his lectures. So I'm just going to share my screen here. If you'd like to actually come into the Hangout, then you need to join our Facebook group, and you'll get the link there to do that. That's the only way to do that at the moment. So there's a Facebook group link in the description, and I'm just going to go for 1 second and share the screen. Also, if you're watching in America, I've just realized that some of you might be expecting this to be in an hour's time. Our clocks just went back, and this week we're actually out of kilter with normal American times. So I completely forgot about that. So I forgot to post about that in the group. So apologies if you wanted to come on and this is actually a bit too late or a bit too early. It's actually quite confusing. Just for 1 week, where I am in Portugal is only 4 hours behind New York instead of 5, which means the Hangout, I think the Hangout is late. I'm not sure. Anyway, either way, we're here now, so it doesn't matter. But next week it will be back at the time. It will be at the same time. It will be at 4 o'clock in Lisbon and 11 a.m. New York time. I think today it's only 12 o'clock. It's already 12 o'clock in New York. So that's it. I've just worked it out. So we're a bit late or early, depending on where you are in the world. So, so let's just share the screen and start to read. Okay. So we're on page 7, and it is, do you form definite and prompt decisions when you have all the facts in hand to make decisions? The audience member said yes. Napoleon said, well, I think some of you are just a little bit too modest. Seriously, friends, if you do not have the habit of making decisions promptly and definitely, clear-cut decisions when all the facts are in, you're loafing on the job, you're procrastinating, and you're destroying this very vital thing called personal initiative. One of the finest places to start practicing personal initiative is to learn to make decisions firmly, definitely, and quickly once you have all the facts available. Napoleon wasn't talking about snap judgments, opinions, or snap judgments based upon half-baked evidence. He was talking about facts, all the facts, on a given subject which are in your hands and available. You should then do something with those facts. You should make up your mind exactly what you're going to do and not dilly-dally around as so many people do. If you do that, the first thing you know, you'll be in the habit of dilly-dallying around in connection with everything. In other words, you'll not be a person who acts upon his own or her own personal initiative. Then the 9th thing, and these are like traits of success that he's going through. The 9th one, the habit of basing opinions on facts instead of relying on guesswork. How many of you do that? How many of you can rely upon facts instead of guesswork? Well, you're a pretty truthful bunch, I think. I wonder if you recognize how many times you're acting on guesswork in comparison with the number of times you're acting upon facts in forming your opinions. Did you know that you have no right to an opinion about anything at any time, anywhere, unless it's based upon facts or what you believe to be facts? Did you know that? Why is that true? Because you don't want to get into trouble. You don't want to fail. That's why. Of course, you can go ahead and have opinions. We all do, a flock of them. You can even give them to somebody else without them asking for them, and we do that right along. Before you really and truly can safely express an opinion or have one, you must do a certain amount of research and base your opinion upon facts or what you believe to be facts. 10. Enthusiasm. The capacity to generate enthusiasm at will and under control. Do you know how to generate enthusiasm at will? Audience members, act, be sincere, conviction. Napoleon said, fine, but what's back of all this? What happens before you start doing anything in connection with enthusiasm? You have to feel it, don't you? You have to feel the emotion. Your mind has to be alerted with some definite purpose, objective, or motive. then you can do something about that motive. You can do it with words, with the expression of your face, or by some other form of action. That word action is inseparable from the word enthusiasm. You can't separate the two. There are two kinds of enthusiasm. There's passive enthusiasm, which you feel but you give no expression of it whatsoever. And there are times when you need that kind, because if you don't have that kind, you'll disclose to other people what goes on in your mind at times when you don't want that to happen. You'll take a great leader, and while they may have a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, they will display that enthusiasm only to whoever they please and under whatsoever circumstances they please. They will not just turn it off and go off and leave it. That's the way you and I do it. Or do we? That's the way the majority of people do. When they have enthusiasm, they just turn it on, blubber over in it, and they accomplish nothing. Controlled enthusiasm turned on at the right time and then turned off at the right time, is an important thing. And your initiative is the only thing that can control that. If you took that one subject alone, the question of how to turn on and off enthusiasm and cut the art down fine, you would become a marvelous salesperson of anything you wanted to sell. Did you know that? You really could. Did you ever hear of anybody selling anything that didn't feel enthusiasm for what they're trying to sell? Did you? Audience member said no. Napoleon said, did you ever sell anything that you didn't have that feeling of enthusiasm over what you were trying to do for the other fellow? Audience members said no. Napoleon said, well, you may have thought you did, but you didn't. If you didn't have that feeling of enthusiasm on your own initiative, then you didn't make a sale. Somebody may have bought something from you because they needed it and had to have it, but you had very little to do with it, unless you had that feeling that you imparted to them. And how do you start the feeling of enthusiasm to another person? How do you do that when you're selling, for instance? An audience member said, well, you must be sold on it yourself. And Napoleon said, yeah, you must be sold on it yourself. That's a very good way of putting it. In other words, it starts inside of your own emotional makeup. You must feel that way. If you open your mouth and speak, you must speak with enthusiasm. You must put enthusiasm into the expression of your face. Put on a smile, a good broad one. Nobody speaks of enthusiasm with a frown on their face. The two just don't go together, do they? No, they don't. There are a lot of things that you must learn about this business of expressing enthusiasm if you're going to make the most of it. And all of them involve your personal initiative. You've got to do it. Nobody can do it for you. Napoleon can't tell you how to be enthusiastic, but he can tell you the component parts of enthusiasm and how to express it. After all, the job of actually expressing it is up to you. So then tolerance. Do you know what tolerance is? Audience member said, an open mind. How many of you are open-minded in everything? Come on. Do you really think you are? I would hate to tell you how far off you are on that, because you're friends of mine and I want to keep you that way. Open-minded on all subjects? I'll admit that I'm not. I'm not open-minded on all subjects. I'm open-minded on a lot of subjects, the ones I want to be open-minded on. But we shouldn't have any attitudes towards any circumstances unless it's based upon something to justify that attitude, or what we believe to justify it, at least. Do you have any idea how much value you deprive yourselves all the way through life just because you close your mind against somebody you don't like, when the person might be the most beneficial person in the world to you, if only you had an open mind towards them? Do you know that one of the costliest things in an industrial or business organization is the closed minds of the people that work there? Did you know that? If you don't know that, I want you to find it out. It's the most costly thing in any business organization or any industry, is the closed minds of the people that work there. Closed towards one another, closed towards opportunities, closed towards the people they serve, and closed towards themselves. When you speak of intolerance, you often think of somebody who doesn't like the other fellow because of their religion or their politics. That doesn't scratch the surface of the real meaning of this subject of intolerance. It extends to almost every human relationship, and unless you form the habit of maintaining an open mind towards all subjects, towards all people at all times, you'll never be a great thinker. You'll never have a great magnetic personality, and you certainly will never be very well liked unless you do have an open mind. Did you know that you can be very frank with whom you don't like and who you do not like if they know that you're sincere and you have an open mind? Did you know that? The one thing that people do not tolerate is to recognize that they're talking to someone whose mind is already closed, and what they're saying has no effect whatsoever, regardless of how much value there is to it or how much truth there is to it. There are a lot of people in this world whose mind is so definitely closed on so many things that you couldn't crack the mind with a sledgehammer. Oh, Sorry, 1 second.
Are you with someone?
I'm just doing a hangout. Oh, is it urgent? Or we finished in like 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. So there are a lot of people in this world whose mind is so definitely closed on so many things that you couldn't crack the mind with a sledgehammer, and you couldn't get an ounce of truth in there if you lived 100 years. They're just closed up tight, sealed. And then 13, the habit of doing more than you're paid for always. How many of you do that? Let me have your hands. What's the matter with the ones who don't? The word always. And Napoleon said, yep, that word always. All right, let's live it up. How many of you follow the habit of rendering more service and better service than you're paid to render part of the time? Napoleon, that's more like it. There's something in connection with which you certainly have to move on your personal initiative. Nobody's going to tell you to do that, and nobody's going to expect you to do that. That's something that is entirely within your own prerogative. Incidentally, it's probably one of the most important and one of the most profitable sources through which you can exercise your own personal initiative. If Napoleon had to pick out the time, place, and circumstance under which you could make use of your personal initiative most beneficially, undoubtedly it would be in your connection with your following the habit of more service and better service than you're paid to render. You don't have to ask anybody for the privilege of doing that. And also, if you do follow that habit, not just once in a while, that's not so effective. Sooner or later, the law of increasing returns begins to pile up dividends for you. When the dividends come back, they come back greatly multiplied. When you start living by this principle of going the extra mile, you can expect unusual things to happen to you, and they'll all be pleasant, every one of them. Tactfulness and a keen sense of diplomacy. How many of you have tactfulness and a keen sense of diplomacy? Napoleon, let me see your hands on that one. That's pretty good. Maybe that definition is a little too broad. How many of you are tactful in your conversations with people? That's pretty good. How many of you think this business is being, what do you think of this business of being tactful? Is it worth the time it takes to be tactful? That's right, you get the cooperation of others more easily if you're tactful. You come in and tell me I've got to do something, and I would say, well, now, just a minute. Maybe I do have to do something, but if you put it to me that way, I'm going to set up some resistance right away. One of the most impressive things that Napoleon learned from Andrew Carnegie at the very beginning of his association with him was that he never commanded anybody to do anything. Never. No matter who the man was that he requested to do something, he never commanded. He always asked him if he would do a certain thing. Would you please do a certain thing, or will you do the other thing? It's surprising the amount of loyalty Mr. Carnegie had from his men. They'd go out their way for him any time of the day or night because of his tactfulness in dealing with them. When it was necessary for him to discipline one of them, he usually invited them out to the house and gave them a nice steak dinner, a real 5 or 6 course dinner. He really put on the dog, and after dinner, the showdown came when they went over in the library. He would start asking questions. One of his chief secretaries was scheduled to become a member of his mastermind group, and this boy found out that he was scheduled for promotion. It went to his head and commenced to run around with a bunch of high binders in Pittsburgh, where people would throw cocktail parties and such. In a little while, he was taking on too much liquor, staying out too late. His eyes were hanging out of his cheeks when he would come in the morning, and Mr. Carnegie let this go on for about 3 months, and he got invited out one evening to dinner. After dinner was over, they went into the library. Mr. Carnegie said, I'm sitting over there in your chair, and you're sitting over here in my chair. I want to know what you would do if you were in my place. You had a man scheduled for an important promotion, and all of a sudden, it seemed to have gone to his head, staying up late at night, drinking too much liquor, paying too much attention to everything except his job. What in the world would you do with a case of that kind? I'm anxious to know. The young man said, Mr. Carnegie, I know you're going to fire me, so you might as well just start in and get it over with. Mr. Carnegie said, oh no, if I wanted to fire you, I wouldn't have given you a nice dinner, and I wouldn't have you brought up to my house. I could have done that down at the office. No, I'm not going to fire you. I'm just going to have you ask yourself a question and see whether or not you're in a position to fire yourself. Maybe you are, maybe you're closer to it than you realize. That man right about faced and did become one of Mr. Carnegie's mastermind alliances and did become a millionaire later on. It absolutely saved him from himself. His tactfulness was out of this world. He knew how to handle people. He knew how to get them to examine themselves. It wouldn't do much good for Napoleon to examine you, but it might do a lot of good if you examine yourself in connection with your faults and in connection with your virtues. Self-analysis is one of the most important forms of personal initiative that you can possibly engage in. Napoleon never let a day go by that he didn't examine himself to see where he was weak, where he could make improvements, and what he could do to render more service and better service. He examined himself every day, and that went on for a great number of years. He always found some place where he could improve, do something better, or do something more. It's a very healthy form of personal initiative, and it's very interesting too. You finally get down where you'll be honest with yourself. Do you have any idea how many people there are who are dishonest with themselves? It's the worst form of dishonesty that Napoleon knew anything about at all. Creating alibis in your own mind to support your acts, your deeds, and your thoughts, instead of examining yourself where you're weak and then bridging those weaknesses or getting somebody in your mastermind alliance to bridge them for you. That's personal initiative too. And it's the kind of personal initiative that most people won't engage in because it involves self-analysis and self-criticism. Which would you rather have? Would you rather have an outsider criticizing you and point out your faults? Would you rather criticize yourself and find them? Or you can be kind of confidential about it. You don't have to publicize these weaknesses that you find out. You can get them corrected before anybody else finds out about them if you do a good job. Because if you have to wait until somebody else calls them to your attention, then they become public property, don't they? They might embarrass you. They might hurt your pride. They may even cause you to build up an inferiority complex if you wait for the other person to point out your weaknesses to you. That's personal initiative too, finding out what your weak spots are, what it is that causes you to be disliked by other people, why it is you're not getting ahead as well as some of the other people, and why you know you've got just as much brains or even more than they have. Another marvelous way to take personal initiative is to compare yourself with other people who are succeeding beyond your success. Make comparisons and analysis and see what it is that they have that you don't. You'll be surprised to find out how much you can learn from the other fellow, maybe the other fellow you don't like very well either. You can learn something from him. If he's doing better than you, you can always learn something from them. Perhaps sometimes you can learn something from the fellow who's not doing as well as you're doing too. It works both ways. You might find out why they're not doing as well. Okay, I'm going to come back to the Hangout here. Okay, it seems to be freezing. These technical things are really, I really hope they start to work better. Okay, so just a quick recap. I think I'm going to have to stop early today because I need to talk to my housemate. But basically, recap of what he was saying was have enthusiasm, but don't be over the top with it. I think it basically like don't you go hypey on people. You know how sometimes people get really, they exaggerate something, how good it is, or they use really excessive language. And this actually goes on a lot. People can sense that, and it doesn't always feel very honest. It doesn't feel very genuine. And if you can actually just find where you're excited about something, because that's what most marketing and sales is the transfer of enthusiasm, you know, even for ideas or anything that you want to do, where you're telling someone about it. You know, you need to have that enthusiasm behind it, but sometimes people will tell you, you need to hype it up, you need to make it sound like it's the best thing and people are going to die if they don't get it. I personally don't subscribe to that train of thought, to that school of thought. I think people are aware and they will sense that there's something not quite right there because you're basically exaggerating. So I always believe just be honest. You know, you don't need to be downbeat about something, but just genuinely tell people what you're excited about, and that will be more effective. I know that's who I respond to more than people that are like, yeah, you got to do this, da da da. And I don't know, maybe it's my British background, but that does not wash for me personally. And I think you have to realize what works for you, what you respond to, and then go with that. And then the other thing that he mentioned was having an open mind. Another way to describe that could be basically training yourself not to judge things, you know, because when we judge stuff, we decide that it's right or that it's wrong. We basically, it's like you set up all these conditions in your universe, and then things can come to you only if they agree by those conditions. You know, like if you decide that you only like to eat, I don't know, let's say Italian food because all other food is horrible. And this is a really silly example. No one would really do that, maybe apart from some Italians. But you know, then you would probably find that even if you did go out and eat food that wasn't Italian, it wouldn't taste good, or you'd go to some restaurants that weren't very good, or you'd get food poisoning. But we're so powerful, you'd probably end up creating a negative experience with other types of food simply because that's your opinion of them. What we think is what we create. We don't just, and this isn't just airy fairy stuff, this is actually what quantum physics in the last 100 years, there have been big shifts in science, and this is actually what science has found, is that when you look at something, you're not just this neutral observer, you're actually shaping that thing in the way that you look at it. So let's say, if you're open-minded and you train yourself not to judge things, you're basically just seeing the world a little bit like a child, because children don't tend to judge, and that can actually make it easier to receive more from the universe, because you don't have all these judgments and these prejudices in your mind. So you could go out and eat amazing Jamaican food or amazing Australian food, because you wouldn't have this point of view that only Italian food is great. So that's another way of explaining that point that he was just making. And the final thing that we talked about, I've already forgotten what it was only 5 seconds ago, looking at how quickly you make decisions about things and how honest you are with yourself. So I think that's a really great point, like really sort of without judging yourself, again, having that open-mindedness, not judging things about yourself, but being willing to see where, okay, I do tend to procrastinate, or I do tend to do this kind of half-heartedly. And when you start making a commitment to yourself, I'm going to do this really well. Everything I do, I'm just going to do it really well, as good as I can. Things do become more rewarding, because you're not just half-heartedly doing it. You start to take a pride in it, and usually that, because you're doing it well, it starts to get better results for you. That's what I found anyway. And so that's a really great way to also just start to create like a snowball effect of better and better results that are coming towards you, because you're taking better and better action, creating that. So I'm going to wrap things up here, tiny bit early. Apologies for that, but I've got to, I think I've got to wave off my housemate who's leaving on a big trip. So I'm glad that we could have the recording working until now. Got any questions, any feedback about today's reading, then comment in the group. I'll post the video in a little while as well, as soon as it's been processed by YouTube. And I wish you an awesome day. Just remember, be enthusiastic, not hypey. Have an open mind and be willing to be self-aware. So if you do that, you'll be on the path to doing whatever you wish to do in your whole life. So I'll see you soon. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.